Well, welcome here as we look at ethics and what it means to be a Christian and think about right and wrong. And one of the questions that we ask is concerning objectivism and relativism, but it's really centered around the question, which is there such thing as moral truth? It's kind of a yes or no question. Is there objective moral truth that's out there that's available for all people to know, to have, and to believe, and to live accordingly? Or is there not? Is it a matter of opinion? Is it a matter of what it is that I choose to do? What exactly is uh, the situation here? Do we have objective moral truth or do we not? There are four various options about whether or not there is moral truth and just how we might get to that particular position of having moral truth or not. And so we're going to cover those four views and then discuss the Christian point of view on that subject. So number one, the view that we're going to talk about is objectivism. Objectivism is a view that there are moral values that are valid for everyone. For example, torturing infants is wrong. It doesn't matter what culture, what country, what position you happen to be in, or who you are as a person. That's just wrong. There are some things that are wrong or right for everyone. In the similar way that we might say 2 plus 2 is 4, and it doesn't matter what your opinion is on the subject. It's an objective fact that 2 plus 2 is 4. I don't care that your opinion says that it's 5 or 3 or 100. The fact of the matter is that 2 plus 2 is 4. In a similar sense, that's what subjectivism is doing in regards to moral truth. It's a view that states that there are moral values, moral truths that are available and valid for everyone. Does not matter what your opinion is on the subject. Does not matter what a culture's opinion is on the subject. There are some things that are just right, just wrong for everyone. So those are some options. There's torturing infants are wrong, helping the poor is good, murder is wrong. Those are some objective statements that most of us kind of have a gut intuition that's telling us that, yeah, those things are just right, just wrong, and they are valid for everyone. One of the weaknesses, or you could say criticisms, that is often lodged against objectivism, and I'm not going to answer all these objections right now. These are just objections that are laid out there. One of the objections is, what about all those moral disagreements that are out there? There's all sorts of people that disagree about objective moral truth, in the sense of there are disagreements about things, say, for example, whether or not abortion is right or wrong, and the people disagree about said subject. And so because of that, it would seem like if there is such thing as objective moral truth, we might find more agreement than we do. Now, there's an answer to some of these objections, not just for objectivism, but even some of the other ones that we'll raise. But for now, I'll just kind of leave you hanging there. So how might you respond to that objection against objectivism, that there is a lot of moral disagreement that's out there? Option number two is a fairly popular one. Comes from anthropology, but it's this. This is how they make their argument. People's moral judgments vary from culture to culture. If people's judgments vary by culture, then right and wrong are relative to culture. Right and wrong are relative to culture, then there is no such thing as objective moral truth. Instead, who defines truth in this situation are cultures. Groups of individuals who kind of discern and decide what is right and wrong for them. And that's, for example, like for why some cultures would drive on the right-hand side of the road, some drive on the left-hand side of the road. They would say, like, look, there's not a right or wrong in that situation. There just is a difference of opinion about which side of the road that you're going to drive on as a culture. And so it's basically whatever your culture has agreed on, that is right and wrong for them. So that argument is made usually through world observation, like I just mentioned, like driving on the right-hand side of the road or left-hand side of the road. And there's disagreement about that, and so on and so forth. Other disagreements could be about, children speaking in the presence of adults or other such things. And they're going to look at that and say, look, in some cultures it's right for children to speak in the presence of adults. In other cultures it's wrong. Nobody's really actually truly right or wrong in that situation. It's just a difference of cultural preference. And so most of this comes out of social sciences and anthropological studies. When people look at how various people groups operate and various cultures operate, there's disagreement about, and since there's that disagreement from culture to culture, there really isn't a definitive answer to what is actually right, what is actually wrong. We need to let cultures decide for themselves. Well, here's a couple of arguments that are out there that go against the particular position of cultural relativism. So number one, there's no way to say that cultures are wrong about things. For example, the Rwanda genocide in 1994, the Hutus versus the Tutsis. We can't actually say that genocide is wrong because in this particular case, if cultures get to define what's right and wrong for themselves, if they decide to go out and commit mass genocide, well, then that's right for them. Well, of course, most of us would say that no, genocide is just wrong, which again kind of would put us in the objectivist side of the fence because we're saying that it's just wrong. It doesn't matter what your opinion is. Genocide is always wrong. So there's no way to say that cultures are wrong about things. For example, the Rwandan genocide in '94 or Nazi culture for that matter, and other such things. One of the other objections raised against cultural relativism is that it also would make social reformers, some individuals who we hold in high esteem, to be in the wrong. People such as Martin Luther King Jr., Gandhi, Jesus, individuals who are seeking to reform the morals of society now become wrong. When we tend to think like, no, what they were doing was a project in which what needed to happen to bring us to be more morally correct and right. And what about moral disagreements between people in the same culture? So, for example, suppose a culture is split 50-50 down the middle about a particular issues, anything from abortion to homosexuality or everything else. Well, how are we going to discern who's right and who's wrong? If there's no higher court of appeal, then there really is no way to say who's right and wrong about that particular issue. So, who gets to decide what it makes constitutes a culture anyway? Do we have Midwestern culture, Southern culture, Western culture, Northeast culture? How exactly are we going to delineate what composes and comprises a culture and not? So, so initially it might sound pretty good, cultural relativism, but it falls apart rather quickly because it just in the end of the day, you can't really figure out what exactly is the culture that we're talking about, and there's some very strong objections against it, which has led some individuals to leave cultural relativism as a position and embrace something else called subjective relativism. Now, cultural relativism is concerned with groups of people deciding what is right and wrong for them. Subjective relativism says it's up to the individual. So I decide what's right for me and wrong for me, and you decide what's right for you and wrong for you. So one is morally right, or something is morally right if I approve of it. If I approve of it, it's morally right. If I disapprove of it, then it's morally wrong. So it's all up to me to discern and to decide what is right and wrong for me. So this is a fairly popular position in America right now. This is when somebody would say like, oh, everybody's entitled to their own opinion, or you get to decide what's right and wrong for you. I'm not to impose my moral values, moral views upon you, etc. So subjective relativism is saying that each person gets to decide for themselves what's right and wrong for them. That's kind of the position initially. But what are some of the objections that are raised against subjective relativism? Well, number one, individuals become morally infallible. So what do you mean by that? Well, I'm not able to make a moral mistake in this particular view. Everything that I do, if I act according to what I believe is right and wrong, is right and wrong for me. And so I am morally infallible. I make no mistakes regarding right and wrong. Well, what that means then is that we can't say that about anybody else as well. So somebody say, for example, a serial killer, a rapist, or Hitler, we can't say that they are wrong because they are morally infallible. It's impossible for them to make a moral mistake. It doesn't really make any, it's really difficult to say why somebody like a serial killer or Hitler would be wrong. Very difficult to hang on to this position consistently. Disagreements become impossible as well. We're not actually able to have any disagreement regarding right and wrong because really, who cares? Why should we even care about like what other people think? I can be my own pope, my own autocrat, make all these moral judgments for myself. Who even cares to have a moral argument at all? Wouldn't make any sense. It's like, you do what you're going to do, and I'm going to do what I'm going to do, and who cares about discussing these views? And really, at the end of the day, we shouldn't even really care about having these discussions. So that's kind of the second idea there. The last one is an observation that my philosophy professor once made, which is just it's almost impossible to consistently live that way. It's sort of a pragmatic test concerning truth here. So what he would said jokingly is take that person's wallet, whoever's saying this, you determine right and wrong for you, I determine what's right and wrong for me. Take that person's wallet, see what happens. Well, what are they going to do? They're probably going to object to you taking their wallet, and if you reply, you know what, I decided in my own ethical system it is right for me to go around snatching people's wallets, well, they're going to say, like, I don't care that you think it's right for you. You shouldn't go around doing that. Well, as soon as somebody does that, they are no longer a subjective relativist. They've embraced a position, some kind of objectivist position, because they're saying there's some things that are just wrong, such as taking people's wallets. So it's nearly impossible, almost impossible, to consistently live that way. I would go as far as to say it is impossible to live that way. In the end of the day, someone's probably going to collapse back into objectivism. So just to kind of recap so far, 3 positions that we've talked about. Objectivism, there is moral truth that is available, that is valid and true for everyone, regardless of opinion and culture. Then you have cultural relativism, which is groups of people decide what's right and wrong for them. Then you have subjective relativism, which says I get to decide what's right and wrong for me, you get to decide what's right and wrong for you, so it's up to the individual. And then we have the last position, which is called emotivism. Emotivism goes a step further than subjective relativism, and it says that really right and wrong do not exist. There are no. That's just kind of words that we use, kind of a practical designation, and that really when we say we don't like something, or that something is wrong or something is right, we're expressing a psychological, emotional opinion. So, for example, if I say something like abortion is wrong, it can be it's placed in the same category, so like I like coffee ice cream or I dislike black licorice. So it's just an emotional, psychological preference that I happen to have on whether something should be the case or should not be the case. It's not really actually right or wrong. Those things are just kind of arbitrary practical terms that we use, but there's really no concept of right or wrong in emotivism. Instead, it's just you can put it in terms of preferences and dispreferences or likes and dislikes. That's really when somebody's expressing a moral judgment. What they're doing is they're just discussing their psychological preference about something. So that would be the objection, of course, right? Is that nothing is really good or bad. It's just a preference, and essentially it falls under many of the same criticisms that subjective relativism has, which is it's nearly impossible to live this way, right? You can't really live that way consistently, expressing an emotional preference. So, for example, if I take a baseball bat to your car because I'm angry with you, and it is how I happen to feel at the time, and you have an emotional outburst like, "Hey, you shouldn't be doing that." I'm like, well, that's just your psychological preference. It's nearly impossible to live consistently that way. To say that people are just expressing some emotional, I guess, gut level response to that particular case. So those are the 4 views when it comes towards whether or not there is moral truth. So you have objectivism, says there is moral truth, which is available for all people. Then you have cultural relativism, which says each culture gets to decide what's right and wrong for itself. Then you have subjective relativism, which says the person gets to decide what's true for them and wrong for them, or right for them and wrong for them. And then you have emotivism, which says there really is no such thing as right and wrong. We're all expressing just emotional preferences towards things. So, as Christians, the question then is, which one is the Christian position? What do Christians believe about right or wrong? Well, we, and I think almost everyone, is going to end up becoming an objectivist. Paul writes in Romans chapter 1, for example, that there is truth about God, Romans 1:18 and 19, that there's truth about God that is available for all people. And then in Romans 2, he talks about how Gentiles who do not have the law behave as to a law unto themselves because the law of God is written upon their conscience. So it does seem, according to Scripture, and I think it's very much revealed in Scripture, that God very much has a idea of what is right, what is wrong. There's an objective standard that is true for everyone. It doesn't matter what your opinion is, doesn't matter what the culture's opinion is, and it doesn't even care what your emotional preference is. There is right and wrong because God has defined it for us in Scripture and in natural law. We'll talk more about those two concepts later, Scripture and natural law, how they relate to how we make ethical judgments. But for now, I think it's worth concluding here to remind ourselves that at the end, objectivism is going to be the position that a Christian's going to embrace and say, you know what, there is truth, there is moral truth that's out there because God has set the universe up in such a way that there is a definitive answer for what is right and wrong, and God has set that in place in His law, and we ought to adapt our lives accordingly. We ought not to. There is there is no preference and there is no opinion about this subject. There is a fixed understanding about what is right and what is wrong. So we'll talk more about that in the weeks ahead. But for now, kind of wanted to give you a taste of what we're talking about in ethics, which is just these ideas about right and wrong, how we make moral judgments, and other such things. So hope you've enjoyed this. If this is something that you're really interested in, come check out our ethics group. You can email me at Andrew.Hayes44 gmail.com if you want to know more about that and how you might meet up with us.